Well, let's broaden out the discussion of the issues that will come up in any provincial campaign, especially in Northern Ontario. And for that, we connect with Sun contributor Rebecca Thompson, who is also in Toronto. So, Rebecca, the discussion with Lorne Bozinoff was certainly very interesting, looking at the numbers. Let's look at the issues, though. And do you think that the Ring of Fire, these billions of dollars in mining projects in Northern Ontario, or potential mining projects in Northern Ontario, and sort of their stall, is going to be one of the premier issues in that part of the province?
Well, absolutely, and specifically given the fact that when Cliffs Resources, which was the company that recently decided that it was going to put a hold on its projects because of various issues, when they initially announced that they were going to look into developing the chromite natural resources, or this deposit, this huge deposit of chromite in Northern Ontario, the Ontario government had a lot of fanfare around this, that this would create an enormous number of jobs. And of course, just 2 months ago, we heard that Cliffs was delaying the project and for an unforeseeable future. This is definitely an issue in the north, given the fact that in Northern Ontario, they have been very eager to develop the Ring of Fire and to further develop all of the natural resources in the north, specifically when it comes to Aboriginal communities who are looking for more jobs. Now, traditionally, Northern Ontario has been an NDP area. Most of the ridings right now are held by NDP members of provincial parliament. And recently the Ontario Liberals cancelled a long-standing agency, Northland Communications, which didn't bode well in Northern Ontario. But as the Ontario Liberals try to really fight this massive deficit and record-level debt in Ontario, they were looking for low-hanging fruit to get rid of, and they looked at Northland to cancel. So this didn't bode well because it was a communications agency in Northern Ontario that they relied on. Not to mention there's all sorts of concerns over the fact that Premier Kathleen Wynne is being seen more and more as an urban elitist and helping out the city of Toronto. And this certainly doesn't bode well for people in Northern Ontario who look at the city of Toronto as a bit of a nuisance, and a lot of resources go there. So Daniel, I'm not sure if in recent months the Ontario Liberals really have been zoning in on northern issues at all.
So if that's the problem of the Ontario Liberals there, and if Northern Ontario is really one of the strongest areas for the provincial NDP, and I would agree that it is, where does that leave the PCs? Because if they're hoping to make to form government, they've got to break out into areas where they traditionally don't do as well. And if it's not going to happen in Toronto, the PCs aren't left with too many other options either.
Well, we did recently see Doug Holliday go to the Ring of Fire, and the Ontario PCs have tried to develop a little more policy with regards to developing mineral resources in the north and cutting red tape for these type of mining companies to perform better. Now, ultimately, what mining companies need in the north is better infrastructure, and they, of course, need solid investment when it comes to energy with regards to hydro, which of course is an issue in the north, the investments in hydro. And so the Ontario PCs have been talking about this, but also when it comes to small business development, the Ontario PCs have been trying to move forward these issues as well. So under Mike Harris, for example, there were a couple of ridings that the Ontario PCs had, but this is definitely an area that the NDP does best in.
I think part of the problem, and this is going to be a little bit politically incorrect on my part, but forgive me for that. I think we do allow that sort of thing. I think one of the problems for the PCs, at least in Northern Ontario, is that because the NDP is so strong in that part of the province, and because their way of thinking about the economy is considerably different than it is from the progressive Conservatives. That's the way the typical voter in that part of the province might be leaning in any case. The vision of the progressive Conservatives might seem a little too radical for them, and that's a difficult field to till.
Well, it would be interesting to see how individuals in Northern Ontario feel about the Ontario PCs with regards to unionization and right to work. However, keep in mind that when it comes to unions in Northern Ontario, these are largely private sector jobs, and you know, if individuals are in mining or other types of natural resource organization or logging or forestry, you know, they're just looking for job opportunities, let alone, you know, whether or not they have the right to leave their union or not. So it'll be interesting to see any analysis when it comes to this union message that Tim Hudak has in Northern Ontario, and whether or not this resonates, given the fact that they are looking for just more economic opportunities and just overall to do well.
If we could just skip down to the south for a second, Rebecca, are we seeing any kind of effort? I mean, because we could be very close to a provincial election. Are we seeing any kind of effort on the part of the PCs to begin perhaps a bit of an urban breakthrough? Those the by-elections, the recent by-elections, they did win that seat in Etobicoke, so they did have a bit of an urban breakthrough there, but they didn't win in Scarborough. So it's a bit of a wash, I suppose, in the south.
Well, yes, there's ridings such as Thornhill, of course, which is going to be in a by-election coming up, where the Ontario PCs and the Liberals have held in the past, you know, 15 to 20 years. Both Liberals and PCs have held this riding. This is the type of 905 area that is going to be very competitive. One of the largest issues in these areas, for example, will be transportation and how that's going to be paid for. And Kathleen Wynne will be rolling out in the next few months her plan on whether or not to hike taxes to pay for transportation. This is going to likely be front and center as an issue for these 905 areas, because on the one hand, they really want these transportation routes to be improved. On the other hand, they don't want their pockets to you know, have to pay for this too much and their pockets to be reached into too far. So this is going to be something that we're going to hear about. It's going to be a challenge for the Ontario Liberals to show that they can keep taxes low while at the same time deliver all of these services and this new infrastructure. And so this is something that Tim Hudak likely will try to show some leadership on when it comes to these Southern Ontario ridings.
All right. Thanks very much, Rebecca. Very interesting.
Thank you.